Okay, thank you all for joining me on this lovely day. It was a really great Good Neighbor Day this morning. I was at Hollywood Elementary School. We did a beautification project there. We were raking leaves and mulching and trimming bushes, and it was really cool because we had the president of the University of Maryland, Dr. Pines, over there. We also had the chairman of the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, Betty Hewlett, and she's actually retiring, so it was great to see her being so enthusiastic about Good Neighbor Day, because the Department of Parks and Recreation here in Prince George's County has been a big help for Good Neighbor Day. And we also had the mayor of College Park and a council member over there, so it was a great event. It's always great to see. I was amazed to see Dr. Pines getting his hands a little dirty and raking leaves, even bending down to pull a couple of weeds. So that's what gardening is about. It takes a lot of effort, and the more help we can get, the better. We're just trying to improve our communities, and that's what Good Neighbor Day is about. And there's always been a theme with Good Neighbor Day, which is trying to do the best we can for our communities. And really the best we can do is whatever is sustainable. The environmentally friendly piece of Good Neighbor Day is a really important and impactful message to not just university students, but also to city residents and to city government and to county government and to park management and to university management. If we can get this sustainability message to as many people as possible, it makes our communities better and it makes things more resilient. So it's been a great experience for me. I've been involved in Good Neighbor Day for 7 years now. And well, I wanted to go back to the first slide. Let's see. So this is just outside of the city limits of College Park in Berwyn Heights, this photo here. This is an updated presentation that I gave 4 years ago when I was in the park ranger unit. I was managing invasive plants and working Good Neighbor Day every year with that too. But this is Berwyn Heights Elementary School, a beautiful entrance to their school, because it really shows what you can do with sustainable gardening and how you can make gardening fun and give back to the kids and teach the kids and give back to the community and get the community involved. Berwyn Heights Elementary School has mostly native plants and pollinator plants by the entrance to the school. They also have vegetable beds, and they can grow things for their cafeteria or fundraisers or whatever. There's just so many great things you can do with this space, but the fact that the community is involved and that they've chosen native plants makes this such a special garden. And it's not only natives, but they have a lot of, like, the sunflowers in the back there are like agricultural bred sunflowers, but they're great for wildlife, great for birds. This is also near and dear to my heart because I've been really involved in the Berwyn Heights community, and I currently actually live in Berwyn Heights, so it's a great example. A little about me. My name is Michael Ellis. I'm currently a landscape technician with the University of Maryland Arboretum and Botanical Gardens. It's kind of like a landscape crew leader or horticultural assistant position. I work on the landscape enhancement team, which is a really great group for me to be a part of, and we oversee some of the best gardens and landscapes on campus, including the university chapel, memorial chapel, the Garden of Reflection and Remembrance there. Also the entrance to campus, and a lot of conservation gardens and a lot of new buildings on campus are managed by my team. So we work a lot with native plants because that's how gardening is and landscapes are moving, because it's the right thing to do. So I wanted to talk to you today about that. I'm also a certified professional horticulturalist, a Chesapeake Bay Landscape Professional Level 2, and an associate wildlife biologist. So I'm very passionate about insects and pollinators and wildlife and conservation and native plants and environmentally friendly gardening, stormwater gardens, conservation gardens. I worked on the park ranger unit for 5 years before that, and I have a degree from the University of Maryland in wildlife ecology. So happy 10-year anniversary to Good Neighbor Day. It's always great to be a part of this every year. And just want to remind everyone, this is a partnership between the University of Maryland, the City of College Park, and the local Parks and Recreation, Prince George's County Department of Parks and Recreation from Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. There's a short video that's really nice. I'm going to play that right now.
The 10th anniversary of Good Neighbor Day is a special milestone of long-standing partnership with the University of...
Did you all hear that? Can you, somebody in the chat, just verify if you heard the video?
Yep, I heard it.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go back to that. Oops.
The 10th anniversary of Good Neighbor Day is a special milestone of long-standing partnership with the University of Maryland, the City of College Park, and the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. Good Neighbor Day is a day of service that brings Terps together to collaborate with the surrounding communities, including residents and elected officials in the City of College Park. Over the past 10 years, Good Neighbor Day has gathered more than 3,000 volunteers to beautify shared spaces, educate and engage in sustainable practices, and take pride in Greater College Park.
Every year that we've done Good Neighbor Day, I've heard from residents afterwards talking about how great the area is that we work in, how much it helps them look better, how much they appreciate, and whether it's just cleaning up trash, removing invasives, planting trees, how much they appreciate that helps the appearance, and the level of community pride that we take in our public spaces.
Good Neighbor Day really makes a positive impact in the College Park community for so many reasons. It brings people together. It creates a real sense of community where people demonstrate that they care. They care about where they live, they care about how it looks, and they care about each other. It's just a wonderful opportunity.
Good Neighbor Day has been a catalyst for this civic and community engagement effort. The idea of bringing our community to be involved with the surrounding and addressing social changes and addressing social issues and talking about what is impacting our community has been our key mark for the work that we do.
I've gotten terrific feedback from both community leaders and community members about the Good Neighbor Day activity, how appreciative they are that we take a day and provide service that supports their communities, and how especially appreciative they are of our students.
What it means to me is an opportunity to work with our community, to work with our university partners, and to make a difference. There's a saying that you only get out of a community what you put in. And this is our investment in a way to say we care, a way that we want to keep everyone safe, and a way that we celebrate a very great community in College Park.
One of the greatest things about Good Neighbor Day are the people you meet. I have met people because of Good Neighbor Day that I otherwise wouldn't have met. They're my neighbors, my colleagues, but we all come together around service and have fun on Saturday.
So Good Neighbor Day means partnership between the community and the university. We have this partnership ongoing, but this is one time per year that we can come together and work to beautify College Park.
I think Good Neighbor Day is an event that everybody should be involved with, regardless if you're in a group, if you're by yourself, because if you go there, you'll make a friend, you'll meet people, you won't regret your time. It is one of the most truly enriching experiences that I have had here, especially doing service work, and I am very happy that it still exists and that it is still moving forward and gaining support.
The wonderful thing about Good Neighbor Day is it's here to stay. It has been here for 10 years, again, happy anniversary, but it's going to be here for 10 more years and 10 more years after that, only it will get better and better and better.
Good Neighbor Day is so important to our community as a whole, to bring together our neighbors with the students, with the faculty, and really have all of us join together in
Okay, that was a great video. It's also important that we give special thanks to our sponsors who keep this going every year and provide a lot of opportunities for our community, from donating food to giving out gift cards to volunteers, and having a lot of networking and great support from these supporters. I just want to say this is something that all webinars are going to read a brief statement here that I think is really important about our history and how we got to this moment, and acknowledging what this what this land really means to people. Okay, so every community owes its existence and strength to the generations before them around the world who contributed their hopes, dreams, and energy into making the history that led to this moment. Some were brought here against their will. Some were drawn to migrate from their homes in hope of a better life. Some have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. Truth and acknowledgement are critical in building mutual respect and connections across all barriers of heritage and difference. We believe it is important to create a dialogue to honor those who have been historically and systematically disenfranchised. So we acknowledge the truth that is often buried. We are on the ancestral lands of the Piscataway people, who were among the first in the Western Hemisphere. We are on indigenous land that was stolen from the Piscataway people by European colonists. We pay respects to Piscataway elders and ancestors. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that brings us together here today. All right, that's a very important message, and maybe I can tie things into that. So what we're talking about today, gardening for good, it was originally gardening with natives, but I wanted to just expand on that a little bit and really make it about doing good things, and we'll get into that. So first, we're going to touch on what is sustainable gardening. And then we're going to talk about birds and bees and what do they need. Native plants for biodiversity, host plants, nectar plants, and habitat, and supporting ecological life cycles. Then we need to talk about being careful about what we plant. And that'll touch on invasive plants, prevention, and landscape maintenance. So what is sustainable gardening? Well, there's a lot of components of sustainable gardening, and I just don't have enough time to get into all of it. In fact, you could spend a lifetime on learning about native plants and learning about horticulture and gardening, and you still wouldn't have everything covered. So this is just a brief touch on what I can talk about in this period of time. Sustainable gardening, we're really focusing on achieving a result in a garden that's maintainable and ecologically positive gardens for natural and cultural benefits. So we're not just trying to support our communities and keeping these gardens maintainable, but we're trying to provide environmental benefits, ecological benefits, kind of let nature flourish. And really with sustainable gardens, we want to allow a little bit of nature to return naturally on its own. So that might be something like you might have an oak tree that pops up, and instead of weeding it out, maybe we can let it grow, or maybe we can relocate it. Again, this photo here is Berwyn Heights Elementary School. And so there's a lot of pollinator plantings, but there's also some really important sustainable practices here. There's a compost tumbler. So using the local resources to kind of return them back into the garden. You know, when you prune things, when you rake up leaves, you can put that in the compost pile and really improve the soils locally. And it saves you money, it saves you time, and it improves your environmental conditions. But we're trying to create an inviting space for humans, wildlife, and natural processes, supporting local species with the right native plants adapted to local conditions. Now, the interactions between local species, including insects, pollinators, wildlife, birds, even bacteria, and so many millions of other organisms that we don't even think about. These interactions between wildlife, animals, and plants, and fungi, and everything else evolved over millennia, millions of years, really. And they coexist in these communities of ecology and plants. Plant communities are the basis of the food chain. So we really need to be careful when we're bringing new things in and we're taking things out, and we're really altering the landscape so dramatically. So sustainable gardening aims to kind of let the landscape repair itself, or reduce the extent of our impact of landscape management into these natural landscapes, or recreate natural landscapes where there's been too much disturbance. We're trying to conserve water, energy, soils, natural geology, organic matter, and other resources. Again, this is Berwyn Heights Elementary School, a great example of trying to use as many practices in sustainable gardening as you can. Also notice the rain barrel over there, and there are various other locations at the elementary school and all over the University of Maryland, and community centers and elementary schools and public schools all around Prince George's County. Everyone's trying to step up and work on stormwater issues and work on sustainable gardening issues. So it's a great conversation. Next, we're going to go on to the birds and the bees. What exactly do they need? But why should we be concerned about them? The reality is, if you read the news, if you're following current events, science, natural phenomena, we're seeing declines in wildlife of all kinds across the planet, especially insects, especially bees. but it's affecting everything. We're seeing declines in all pollinators and all birds and wildlife. We're losing habitat at a phenomenal rate, but we're also poorly managing or selfishly managing our own developed areas, often neglecting the ecological processes and ecological value that this land has had historically to all of these species. So, I mean, we talked about the Piscataway people. These are indigenous lands and all of these animals. This is the indigenous land of wildlife, of pollinators, of birds. And we need to be careful about continually taking away the land from these indigenous and native species and native peoples, respecting that the Piscataway people lived in a much more harmonious way with the environment. So I just want to, before we get too deep into gardening with native plants and other sustainable gardening topics, I just want to mention that habitat preservation is the best hope for biodiversity, protecting biodiversity, all of those species that are declining. It goes well beyond anything I described. So this is an example. These photos here were taken in Prince George's County. This is an example of a globally rare ecosystem that we have in Prince George's County, which is a pitch pine forest. So the New Jersey Pine Barrens once extended all the way to Washington, D.C., well before it was called Washington, D.C. And we have little pockets of remnants of the New Jersey Pine Barren, which is a globally rare ecosystem. It only occurs in the mid-Atlantic, mostly on the seaboard, but it comes inland right here in Prince George's County. And the thing is, if we continue developing land, we lose these ecosystems often before we've even properly understood what was there and all of the species. It's not just about one species of tree. It's not just about the pitch pines. It's about these uncommon wildflowers. It's about these uncommon grasses. No, people don't realize that Maryland has sugarcane. I mean, this is a sugarcane plume grass. So we have really unique species right here in Prince George's County. We have wild blueberries and huckleberries and all kinds of things growing in this environment, and they're all over. And they're just not well understood by the public, and they're not appreciated because plant identification is difficult and plant awareness is difficult. So really we need to protect these things because people just don't understand them well enough. It's the only way we're going to prevent the acceleration of declines in species biodiversity. So if we really want to protect birds and bees, and we really want pollinators and beneficial insects in our environment, in our gardens, and I realize that I'm talking to a lot of University of Maryland students who are just getting started in life, and not everyone has a garden. And I've only had my garden here for less than a couple of months. So it's not just about gardening, really. It's about protecting species, and it's about how we manage public spaces. So we want these birds. It's a proven fact that your mental health, all of our mental health, each one of us, is much better when we hear songs, when we hear birds singing songs every day, when there are birds flying around us and other wildlife. It really calms us down. It allows us to feel that we're in a healthy, inviting space, to see the greenery, to see flowers, to see butterflies. These things reduce anxiety, and improve our well-being. And it's very important that we understand what these species need. So for example, the black-capped chickadee is a famous example that's recently been used by Doug Tallamy and others in the in this movement of people that are really trying to convince the world to switch to gardening with native plants. It's a huge topic. So a study was done in Washington, D.C. about one pair of chickadees. And it was done with many, many pairs of chickadees and trying to figure out what did it take to raise a family of chickadees, just, 3 to 5 little chickadee chicks. Other songbirds also were studied and found the same results. One pair of chickadees must catch and shove down the throats of their little chicks 7,500 caterpillars in 25 days. 7,500. So that's hundreds and hundreds of caterpillars every single day that they must find in the environment. And we want these chickadees around. We want to hear them making their little chirps and their little songs. It's good for us to have these birds around. So really, to have these birds around, we need to allow them to be able to find these caterpillars in their environment. And it's not just chickadees, bluebirds, mockingbirds, flycatchers, robins, cardinals, just about any songbird you can think of. They're not actually feeding their little babies seeds. Babies cannot digest seeds, and they're raising their young in the springtime. That is really, really, really important point. There are no seeds or berries in the springtime. They're all gone. So they need a soft, fleshy protein to feed their young, nutrient-dense food source. And insects are the answer for most birds raising young. So we need to support them. Okay, what does that look like exactly? 7,500 caterpillars in only 5 days to raise 3 to 5 chicks? So I put this together. I found 7,500 caterpillar images, and I strung them from one end to the other, one to see. And these, of course, are not actual size. So it's really had to be shrunken down to fit on the slide here. It's really dramatic how many caterpillars we need to support a family of chickadees. Okay, so bird families really need a lot of caterpillars and insects to be thriving in our environment. But what do caterpillars and insects really need? Well, what they really need are native plants, and specific native plants. They need host plants, they need nectar plants, and they need plants that protect them, providing habitat. So for example, in a pollinator garden, a lot of the times you want to plant flowers, and just flowers, just perennial flowers. That's all you think a pollinator garden needs, right? Well, it turns out we need to provide trees and grasses and everything else that we can to create a natural ecosystem that would support these pollinators. They can't just live on nectar alone. They need the plants that their larvae, their caterpillars can eat. So we can't just support butterflies with flowers. We have to support caterpillars. And if we want to support birds, we have to support caterpillars. If we want to support other insects, we need to be planting the native plants anyways. So it all comes together. The basis of the food chain are these native plants, and this is how it's evolved for millions of years. Consider this, that if your plants don't have holes in their leaves, they really aren't doing much to support local ecology, if at all. Now, yes, they can provide nectar or berries, but if you can't raise a family of chickadees with these plants because caterpillars aren't grazing on them, and if the caterpillars aren't grazing on them, then we're going to lose the butterflies, and we're going to lose the birds. We're going to lose the bees also. This eastern redbud right here, this photo, I love this photo. It just shows you how much insects love these plants, and it's this lovely heart-shaped leaf. That was actually a leaf cutter bee that cut those holes. So we're supporting bees also with our native shrubs. It's not just about flowers and our native trees. We need to support bees and caterpillars and insects and birds with all kinds of native plants. Consider all kinds. Wildlife need healthy insect populations, so support your local food chain and choose native plants. Okay, so we'll talk about some host plants, nectar plants, and habitat. I just wanted to point out this photo on the left side of the screen here was taken on campus at McKeldin Library. It's a conservation planting that's very gorgeous. This will be blooming in the spring. So these are two examples of plants that go really well together. Blue phlox and heartleaf foamflower at McKeldin Library. So we have native gardens and native plants all over campus, and you've just got to know where to look. And really, if you look anywhere, you'll find them. So if we want to support as many insects as we can, we need to understand which plants are their favorites and which plants would support the most species of insects, which plants would support the most species of caterpillars if we really want these songbirds to improve our lives, hearing their song. Then there's a lot of research out there coming from the University of Delaware, coming from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, coming from all kinds of university research and other research programs, trying to find which host plants really would benefit the most species. And so it turns out, and if you want to know, this is just a small sample of this research. If you want to know more, you can Google best host plants for Maryland or best host plants for the Mid-Atlantic or wherever you live. It turns out that oaks are profoundly important. They're really, and most of the plants on this list are really what we would call keystone species. These are primary producers in the food chain. They're on the lowest tier, but these species are what we call keystone because they support the most number of insects. This is how we stop our songbirds from declining. We need to be planting as many of these species as we can and protecting them in the environment. Gardening with them is just a phenomenal place to start. So it turns out oaks can support 557 species of caterpillars in the Mid-Atlantic mostly. That's over 100 species of caterpillars more than any other genus of tree. The cherries also support an incredible number. Something like black cherry is a great choice for a native tree. It can look a little scraggly, so it's not for every garden, but I'm sure from this list of trees, these are just the families, the genuses of trees. Just from this list, you can find some great things to garden with to really bring these songbirds and insects back into your gardens. Now, how does that stack up with non-native plants? Really? Oh, it turns out that the most popular non-native plants, crepe myrtles, empress tree, butterfly bush. I mean, you think butterfly bush, boy, that'll save the butterflies. Forsythia, all of these trees are pretty well known in landscaping: Nandina, boxwood, dawn redwood, Japanese zelkova. These are really popular landscaping trees. Well, it turns out they're supporting 3 or less caterpillars, many of them supporting 0 caterpillars. If our landscapes were covered in these non-native trees and plants, which for a while there, this was becoming what our landscapes were turning into, mostly non-natives, just because people like them because nothing eats them and they're pest resistant. But this is the next silent spring. We're seeing this every year. It's actually been documented that we have less songbirds, we have fewer. The dawn chorus of singing birds is really, we are getting, these environments are getting quieter. There are less birds chirping. So this literally is the next silent spring, decline in our ecosystem if we continue covering our landscapes and our planet with non-native plants that we've brought in from other areas. So really, every native plant supports the surrounding ecosystem, some of them more than others. This is a really cool plant. It's really beautiful, and it's used by all kinds of wildlife. So the purple passion flower here, you can see the flowers in the top. The bees love this. Butterflies love this plant. And the butterflies love it not just for the flower, but they lay their eggs on it. And there's several species of really important butterflies and pollinators and insects that actually eat the leaves. So on the bottom here, you can see the variegated fritillary caterpillars. They love eating the leaves of purple passion flower. On the right side, you can see an adult variegated fritillary. Now this fruit, this plant makes these great edible fruits. Wildlife go crazy for this. So I enjoy the fruit, and you'll find a lot of drinks and beverages and things are flavored with passion flower. It's a great flavor. And it turns out that the birds are catching these caterpillars and raising their families with them. So we need to encourage that kind of gardening with that kind of plant. Another really important plant are the milkweeds, which are famously supporting the monarch butterflies. But it's not just about monarchs. There are many species of caterpillars and insects that live on milkweeds. In fact, if you have a stand of common milkweeds, you'll learn pretty quickly that there's a whole ecosystem that just covers this plant. The nectar and the fragrance from these milkweeds is just incredible. So all kinds of pollinators love these flowers. And there are several species of caterpillars, but you also can attract, there are aphids that might be a problem on this species. But what's really cool about the aphids is you'll see ants actually interacting with the aphids, and the ants are getting nutrition from the aphids because the aphids secrete honeydew. And so you'll see like a colony of ants now, and then you'll see little wasps that are eating the ants, and it just goes on and on. This is, and you'll see birds eating the monarch caterpillars, and there's a hairy tussock moth caterpillar that also lives on milkweed, and birds eat that. In fact, that's one of the reasons that monarchs are so hard to raise, because birds love these caterpillars. So it's supporting the songbirds just by allowing milkweed to grow. You don't even have to plant it. The seeds float in the wind, and it'll usually find its way into your garden. You just have to stop weeding it out. So it's a great plant, and there's many species of milkweeds, and they're all great. The orange butterfly milkweed and the swamp milkweed and the common milkweed, great for gardening. They might not be the prettiest thing when they have fluffy seeds or insects on them, but It's really important for the environment. This is another cool plant, the northern spice bush, great for gardening, but it supports the spice bush swallowtail on the right side and the caterpillars on the left side. It's a really cool butterfly. Neat looking caterpillars too that have little eyes to kind of trick predators to hopefully not eat them, only because they taste so great. Coral honeysuckle, another great native plant for gardening, but you're supporting local species. Here's the snowberry clearwing that eats the leaves. And this is, you know, a lot of times when people see this little snowberry clearwing moth, it's like a little hummingbird moth. Really fascinating guy. This moth actually has clear wings and hovers around like a hummingbird, and he can actually stay in place and get his nectar. Really great plant, and the flowers themselves are perfect nectar for the hummingbird clearwing or the snowberry clearwing, and also ruby-throated hummingbirds and all kinds of butterflies. Here's another swallowtail, the black swallowtail. You can support the black swallowtail by planting native golden Alexander. Also, you can raise caterpillars with non-native plants. Fennel and dill are really great at raising tremendous numbers of these swallowtail caterpillars. But if you choose the native, you'll be supporting more species of insects and wildlife, of course. So here's one of my favorite gardens at the University of Maryland. This was planted back when I was a student by Chesapeake natives and some of the volunteers on campus and Arboretum staff on campus. So we like it to look nice. This is on McKeldin Mall between Woods Hall and Francis Scott Key. The Maryland Native Shade Garden. I just want to say conservation gardens planted with native plants can be beautiful spaces flourishing with life. And they're great when planted at educational institutions, so you can really teach the next generation or influential people how important native plants are. Not everyone's going to have time to take a hike and see native plants in the wild. So it's really important that we bring these native plants into people's spaces. And if possible, we should be trying to mimic natural local plant communities to support biodiversity of local species, provide habitat, and support biological life cycles and processes. Conservation landscapes have also become really important in stormwater mitigation in urban areas. When designed well, native plant landscapes function as an ecosystem and provide ecological services such as nutrient management, pollution management, and absorbing runoff. Of course, in a garden like this with butterfly milkweed and all kinds of other wildflowers, perennials, shrubs, this is all native plants right here in this stormwater garden. This is at the new Brendan I. Reeb Center for Computer Science and Engineering near the main entrance of campus on Route 1. Of course, you're supporting all these pollinators and you're providing habitat. I've been weeding this garden since they installed it and managing it with, of course, my really great landscape enhancement team and other coworkers that I work with. But we see so much wildlife here. I've seen box turtles in this little garden. I've seen red foxes and cottontail rabbits and songbirds. I've seen a lot of American goldfinches getting seeds from this garden, and all kinds of other songbirds and butterflies and hummingbirds. It's cool. It's cool what the wildlife you can bring in. Here's another one of my favorite landscapes on campus. This is at the Edward St. John Teaching and Learning Center, McKeldin Mall. Just goes to show how beautiful you can make a space by using native plants. We've got our, of course, Maryland State flower, the black-eyed Susan in there. You've got Liatris spicata, blazing star. We also use a lot of, there's some Joe Pye weed in there. We use a lot of native shrubs. Some of them not native to Maryland, but they're native to the Eastern US. So Fothergilla, the dwarf witch alder, and the oak leaf hydrangea in the back there. Really great textures that you can add, and colors. I mean, this time of year, all of these plants are just gorgeous with their fall color. So speaking of trying to mimic natural plant communities, here's another look at the plantings at McKeldin Library. This is Pachyra aurea, the golden ragwort. This is how it grows in the wild. It just kind of covers the ground under large trees in floodplains. What's really great about this native plant, this is a ground cover and it's evergreen. So that means that it's a good alternative to something like Japanese Pachysandra or English ivy or Vinca minor, the periwinkle. So, and it has these gorgeous yellow flowers. It's hard to go wrong with this one. It does cover the ground really well, and that sometimes you got to leave room for other plants. So consider how easily it spreads. Maybe here's another plant that spreads really easily. This plant is hard as nails. White snake root, Ageratina altissima. Great, really tough plant. Hardly needs anything. Hardly needs any water. It'll just grow in really hard ground, and it is just covered in pollinators all the time. I'm just seeing. So here's one of my favorite, really cool looking butterfly, the common buckeye. I mean, how cool is that? Native plants form the foundation of ecosystems and support beneficial biological interactions and are the life support of desirable species. You know, there's the American goldfinch making use of the purple coneflower seeds. So even after these things are dried up and ugly, they're still performing ecological services. It's really incredible. 12 months of the year, these things are supporting other species. Whoops. Here's a hummingbird and an obedient plant. I'm going to have to speed this up. But I've got this plant all over my garden, and I really recommend this one for a lot of gardeners. Beautiful color, and the bumblebees love this, and the hummingbirds love this. It's just incredible how it's just covered in pollinators. Here's another one that's just a really magical plant because of how much the pollinators love this. Monarda. This is just one species of native Monarda that we have. The bee balm, Monarda officiosa. It's the official herb of Prince George's County. It's really, a lot of people just like this plant, and we're not the only ones that like it. The butterflies love it. The moths love it. The bees love it. The hummingbirds love it. Really fragrant, attractive flowers. Nice texture with the leaves there. Now, I don't want to give off the impression that native gardens are low maintenance. Sure, I mean, you can maintain a garden with less inputs. So we really don't need to mulch these gardens because we can just let the leaves do the mulching. That's the sustainable choice. At the university, you know, we're trying to compete with other universities. We're trying to attract new students, and we're trying to keep our landscapes as attractive as possible. So yes, at the University of Maryland, we rake leaves, but I would encourage you, if you have the option to leave some leaves around, that leaf litter is so important for insects. But anyways, conservation gardens need maintenance. They need to be weeded, and you need to practice plant identification. And you can use apps now like Google Lens and Seek and iNaturalist and Picture This and all kinds of apps that actually use digital species identification to really try to help you understand plants a little better. Then you can look up, is this a native plant? Is this a weed? Is it an invasive plant? Certainly remove the plant if it's invasive, because we're trying to aim for sustainability here. But conservation gardens, plants need water. Plants, to be attractive, they need to be weeded. And we should be removing invasive weeds anyways. So it's going to be a lot of work. When you plant new plants, they can die if they're not watered. So the maintenance needs are still there, just like any other garden. So our last topic for today is being careful about what we plant. So this here is a really cool habitat because it's a power line meadow. And what's really unique about power line meadows is that the trees are removed, and that might disturb some people. But the reality is biodiversity is actually highest under power lines because it allows all this sunlight to hit the ground. And rather than having a few species of large trees that are shading out the ground, we now have plants go crazy for this, unlimited access to sunlight. So it's perfect pollinator habitat. You'll see all kinds of wildflowers, hundreds of species of wildflowers in every single power line meadow. And that is some of the best pollinator habitat in the whole country, is under these power lines. So we really want these power line meadows to be thriving with, or any meadow, any ecosystem. We want them to be thriving with native plants. And you see something like this grass here, Chinese silvergrass, M-NCPPC sinensis. This is a common ornamental grass sold at nurseries, and you'll see this in landscapes across the region. People like the texture, they like the size of this grass, and it kind of has a unique look and appearance that it adds to the landscape. So it's widely used. Well, unfortunately, it's also widely invasive in Prince George's County and the Mid-Atlantic. And every year it's getting worse and worse in terms of its invasion in the wild. So this is an early stage invasion of this invasive grass in pristine pollinator habitat, in otherwise pristine pollinator habitat, Prince George's County. And this is what it looks like once it's really caused a big issue. So here we've got late stage invasion of M-NCPPC. And this is actually a globally rare ecosystem right here. We actually have magnolia bogs throughout this power line meadow. This is out in kind of Beltsville, almost Laurel area, Prince George's County. Beautiful, biodiverse, pristine park, pristine ecosystems, except for a couple of invasive species that have really caused a problem. So this M-NCPPC, unfortunately, has spread across over 50 acres of that globally rare ecosystem over there. And it's displacing every single native plant in the power line meadow because it's 7 feet tall. It can be taller than 7 feet tall, and it's like 10 feet wide almost. So, and there's literally thousands and thousands of these plants that are 10 feet wide and 7 feet tall, and nothing can compete with that in a power line meadow where the power company is cutting down the trees. These perennial wildflowers just cannot get any sunlight when you have this massive grass there crowding everything out. So we don't want to plant M-NCPPC. We don't want to plant these invasive grasses. We don't want to plant any invasive species if we can help it, because we're trying to be sustainable. This is a message that is so important for our community. We really need to honor who this land belongs to. It's really the indigenous people and the indigenous species, the wildlife that were here before us. We need to continue to support them and not introduce species that are just going to take over and displace all of the habitat. We should be choosing native grasses and native plants as alternatives. But that's what Good Neighbor Day is about. That's what makes Good Neighbor Day great. Every year for 10 years, and we're going to go another 10, 20, 30 more years of Good Neighbor Day every year. One of the most impactful volunteer opportunities we have in our outdoor spaces is the task of removing and managing invasive plants. Volunteers are great at removing invasive plants and make a huge difference, because a lot of times there just isn't the resources. There isn't a monetary pathway that can pay enough people to manage this problem. So we need all the support from our community, our volunteers, our university students, our university staff, our park staff, our city officials, our local governments, to understand this invasive species problem, get the resources to manage invasive species, but stop planting them in the ground. That's such an important message. So thank you to, I was previously the invasive plant management one of the invasive plant management coordinators for Prince George's County, and I continue to do invasive plant management in my current job for the University of Maryland in the public gardens. And it's really important that volunteers can be engaged in this issue and learn just how much work it is to manage these species, so that we can teach others not to put them in the ground to begin with. That's the best way, is to prevent the problem. If we can prevent the problem, then it would be so much easier to protect these ecosystems. Just stop the introduction of new invasive species, stop the spread of invasive species, continue managing. So a couple of final thoughts here. We can all work collectively as a colony to be better advocates for our local ecosystems, our local landscapes, on behalf of pollinators, the environment, and our communities. Avoid planting harmful non-native invasive plants. We need to accelerate plantings of critical native hosts and forage plants, replace problematic plants with beneficial plants going forward. And again, this is the most important thing we can do, is protect and preserve biodiversity, habitats, rare ecosystems, forests, meadows. Protect it. That's the best way to prevent the decline and continued decline of our ecosystems and all of our wildlife and all the species that we want to have in our environment. So I just want to end it with, I'm going to have a little discussion here, but I want to say anyone can make a difference. You don't have to have a garden. You've got a brain, and you should look at all the evidence and really think critically about how to make the world better. You don't have to have a garden. You can get involved in these volunteer projects. You don't even have to work in a garden. You can work in a park. This is another Good Neighbor Day project, the Park Run project at Acredale. Really great volunteers that did a run early in the morning, and then right after that, they are planting native trees. So this is gardening. Just planting a tree, that's gardening. You don't have to have a green thumb to put a native tree in the ground. You just dig a hole and you put the tree in the ground, and you put the soil back, and you got to be careful how you mulch, and maybe you want to improve the soils a little bit. You got to water the tree. But it's really not that complicated. We don't want to scare people away from gardening, but we want gardeners to be educated, and we want gardeners to know that really we want this land to heal. We need this land to heal. We need these birds and bees and butterflies and pollinators and beneficial insects and beneficial wildlife around us for our own health, for our own well-being. But like I said, you don't have to have a garden. You have a voice, and speak up. Maybe you'll become influential in government. Maybe you'll become influential in a company, in an agency, in a government. Maybe you'll become influential in your community. Maybe you'll become influential in your neighborhood. Ask influential people to do good for our environment. And if somebody's going to be planting plants, or somebody's got money to do a large scale project, ask them. Our collective voice can ask them to do things more sustainably, use native plants, protect ecosystems, and stop disturbing ecosystems. Choose native plants for our environment, okay? I'm going to open it up to any questions. So if you want to type in some questions in the chat, I'm reading the chat right now. Okay, somebody mentioned that Doug Talamay is a professor at the University of Delaware, who's written extensively on important ecological issues. One book is Nature's Best Hope. There are also videos on the web. Yeah, so Doug Talamay is a really inspiring entomologist, and he wrote many great books about this idea of gardening with native plants to support insects and birds and wildlife, to really repair these ecosystems and allow ecosystems to return to these spaces and environments that humans reside in. He also wrote a book about oaks and how they're some of the best trees that we can plant. I mean, we all live in an area that was once the eastern deciduous forest. So we really need to focus on letting trees and woody plants return to our gardens and our natural spaces and our green spaces. Trees are also great, one of the most important tools for mitigating climate change and cooling the planet, and just the shade that they cast is one of the most valuable assets that trees have to cooling our planet. Any suggestions for where to purchase native plants? There's a lot of great nurseries. It helps to understand. It helps to understand what you're doing when you're buying plants. When you buy plants, there's soil that comes with it. Well, I want you all to understand that soil can also contain invasive species. So there are things to be concerned about. There's a weed called mulberry weed, and there are worms called Asian jumping worms. So it turns out that a lot of nurseries now have these invasive species in their soil, and we need to be more careful about where we're getting plants. I want to say that the best native plants that you can get are actually the ones that the squirrels are planting in your yard, the ones that the blue jays are planting in your yard. Squirrels are burying acorns so that they can find them later in the year. So they're actually planting oak trees all around us. Well, oak trees are the best native plants for caterpillars and supporting our songbirds and allowing songbirds to return to our neighborhoods and our green spaces. So these oak trees are germinating. And then we have milkweeds that seeds are blowing in the wind, and they're going to find their way to your garden somehow. Or you can go out to Lake Artemisia or a local park, go to a lake or side of the road and get these milkweed pods and put them in your garden. Those are local ecovar plants. That's what we really want. We want to, can we collect plants within, a couple miles of your garden? Those would be the best plants. The plants that the birds are flying over to a tree and they're pooping out seeds and things germinate. So rather than weeding every plant that you didn't put in the ground, take a look at these little plants that are emerging out of the ground and identify them. Go on iNaturalist, go on Google Lens, or a Facebook group called Plant Identification, and submit these photos and figure out what these things are that are already growing in your garden, and learn, are those native plants? Is that a common milkweed? Is that an oak tree? Is that a black cherry? So the best place to get native plants are the ones that are already trying to find their way back to your garden. Those are the ones that belong here. You have to worry because there are invasive species finding their way into your garden too. But in terms of nurseries, it's a great question. Earth Sangha over in Alexandria, or I guess it's Fairfax actually. They're one of the best nurseries around for growing local ecovar plants. They're a nonprofit. There's also Chesapeake Natives. There's a place called Lauren's Garden Service that sells native plants. But I went to Home Depot a couple of weeks ago and they had 50% off all of their trees, shrubs, and perennials. And I just went through and I said, oh, there's inkberry. That's a native plant. Oh, there's bayberry. That's a native plant. Oh, there's some sedges. They're native. There's some phlox. Those are native. I mean, most of the plants that you'll find at a nursery like Home Depot are not going to be native. And you need to understand the implications of that. You can't just go to any nursery and buy plants that are pretty. Learn to identify plants and look at lists of plants. If you're really interested, join the Maryland Native Plant Society, and you can learn everything there is to learn, or almost everything you can possibly learn about native plants from the Maryland Native Plant Society. There are many other native plant nurseries out there. You can get a list of native plant nurseries from the Maryland Native Plant Society and from Maryland Master Gardeners, or whatever gardening group might be in your area that might know. Okay, yeah, somebody mentioned Earth Sangha. Seems like invasive species should be banned. Shouldn't they though? They really should be. Take a look at the Maryland Invasive Species Council website, mdinvasives.org. They have a list of invasive species that are really concerning, and everyone, this list was put together by natural resource managers, biologists, invasive species experts, horticulturalists, gardeners, master gardeners, the Maryland Department of Agriculture, Maryland state employees, and park staff. Everyone in the Maryland Invasive Species Council represents a unique area of expertise in Maryland. And if they could all agree that an invasive species was a problem, then it was added to this list of invasive plants of concern for the state of Maryland. So take a look at that list, and Maryland state government is actually has now banned most of those species from being planted or purchased by the state government. The Maryland Department of Agriculture, thanks to legislation that was passed by the House of Representatives in the state, actually has a system now for banning invasive plants or regulating the sale of invasive plants. If you go to Home Depot or you go to a nursery that might be selling something like Japanese barberry, which is a highly invasive plant, you'll see a little sign that says may cause environmental harm. So the state is doing a lot of things to discourage people from buying invasive plants, and there are about a dozen species or a couple dozen species now of regulated invasive plants that nurseries either can't sell or they have to warn consumers that they may cause environmental harm. Okay, any other questions? If you want to unmute yourself, maybe ask a question, or if you have anything to say, any thing you want to contribute to this discussion, go ahead.
Thank you, Michael, for this presentation. It's really been interesting. I guess one question, you mentioned leaving the leaves on the ground. I know I've tried planting natives before and they've died, they just haven't survived. Do you have any tips for preparing the soil so that it, the plants will thrive better?
Yeah, so that's a really important topic, a really important question. So you really got to kind of get a good look at your soil and figure out what kind of soil do you have. Is it a clay soil? Is it a sandy soil? Is it full of rocks? Is it full of construction debris? Does water permeate through it? Is it compacted? These are all challenges perhaps for most plants if the growing conditions are a challenge. So things like organic matter are really important. Adding as much organic matter as you can. You can buy Leaf Grow, which actually locally produce compost from people's yard waste and leaves that they put on the curb. And even the University of Maryland's yard waste and leaves that we collect on campus get turned into Leaf Grow compost. Fantastic soil amendment. And the thing about organic matter, and start your own compost pile. Organic matter improves the drainage of clay soils, and organic matter improves moisture retention in sandy soils. Organic matter improves nutrient availability of plants. And one of the challenges with plants is actually providing enough moisture for these plants. They might dry out. A lot of plants will dry out and die if they're recently planted and a summer drought hits or a hot couple of weeks hit it. So organic matter is much better at holding the moisture into the soil and holding the nutrients into the soil and providing those nutrients for the plants. So I really recommend increasing organic matter of the soil because it can improve almost any soil. Be aware that soil compaction is one of the most dangerous things for our native trees and our native plants, and even dangerous for healthy turf. So we need to be careful about how much foot traffic and how much vehicle traffic and how much construction we have on our soils, because we don't want to compact the soils. That leads to really tough growing conditions, and any kind of heavy machinery on these soils or vehicles that drive on soils or heavy foot traffic will eventually kill the tree if it continues, or if it, even for a brief period of time, if you had immense pressure on these soils, it can kill a tree 5 years later. So these are all really important. The components of soil and the challenges of healthy soils and improving the health of the soils are all things to be aware of. And like I said, organic matter is probably your best bet there. You can also fertilize. Native plants we don't have to say we're not going to fertilize, because we want healthy plants. So, adding some nitrogen, of course, following the Maryland state laws on fertilizers, adding some nitrogen, improving characteristics of the soil will make these plants easier to grow. Maybe submit a soil sample. There you can go on Amazon and get a soil sample kit for maybe $12, $13, and just put a little bag of soil together and mail it to one of these companies, and they can tell you about your soils and tell you how the pH is, how is the nutrient availability, what's the soil components, how do they break down, how much organic matter do you have in your soil. So getting a soil sample, or just learning how to analyze your own soils just through soil texture and the color of the soils can tell you a whole lot about levels of organic matter. If you can get to 60% organic matter, you're going to have a great soil for growing plants. Improving the topsoils really allows the plants to survive better. We have a message here. It says, for a rough idea of soil type, check the physiographic regions of Maryland. So there are a couple of maps that can kind of give you, soil maps that can give you an idea of typical soils for your area. So here in Prince George's County, we're in the coastal plain. College Park is just on the edge of the coastal plain. Montgomery County is the Piedmont. So in the coastal plain, we have sandier soils. We also have a lot of smaller pea gravel that might find its way into the soils. But keep in mind that under the sand, there's a lot of clay. So depending on how much construction has gone into these soils, like at the University of Maryland, we have a lot of clay in our soils, and perhaps that's because there's been a lot of construction on campus that brought the clay up. These are subsoils, but I think that typically even in the woods around the University of Maryland, we seem to have a little bit more clay than the rest of Prince George's County. Where I'm at in Berwyn Heights, we have much sandier soils. But like I said, organic matter can improve any of those soil types. Also, some nurseries will check the pH of the soil for you if you bring a little sample. So there might be some, local places that can give you a better idea about your soils. Any other questions or discussion before we wrap this up? All right, well, great. Thanks everyone for joining us. And I only touched on a few native plants. I only touched on a little bit of this really important topic. So definitely join like the Maryland Native Plant Society or a local gardening club and let people know that you're interested in native plants, and volunteer at the University of Maryland Arboretum and Botanical Gardens, or volunteer at your local parks for tree plantings and invasive species removals. These are really important things to get involved in, or, speak up with your town, speak up with your neighbors, speak up with your university, with your local government, and, let people know that you're interested in seeing habitat improved around you. It would be great if we could have more people kind of spreading that message around. Continue volunteering at Good Neighbor Day every year if you can. And we'll just continue pushing this forward, trying to improve sustainability in College Park and at the University of Maryland and in Prince George's County and surrounding communities and in the state of Maryland. And it's a global thing. So let's respect, the land. Let's respect our ecosystems, do the right thing, and try to get more native plants. We really want, if we can get to 75% native in our landscapes, then we'd be supporting, most every species that we could, as long as we're also preserving habitat around us. All right, thank you everyone, and have a great weekend. Enjoy the autumn colors and scenery. Thank you.